Hey everybody, Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here. We've got to talk about a subtropical storm. And before we get into what a subtropical and tropical system are, just know they're basically kind of the same impacts, just set up a little bit differently. We've got Subtropical Storm Nicole, which eventually could have an impact here in the Carolinas later this week going into the weekend. Before we get there, record high temperatures likely today before we see a midweek cool down. So let's get right to Nicole, because this is going to be the main driving weather force this week. This is the wide view. I put the fronts on here, the satellites, the radar, and the track of subtropical storm Nicole. So the first question people have, what the heck is a subtropical storm? Remember, things over the water can have two types of characteristics. Tropical storms, which you're very familiar with, form over warm water and they have a warm core, which means near the center it's warmer than it is outside. Subtropical storms are the little bit of a hybrid. It's a little bit cooler in the middle. Sometimes they have fronts attached to them, so they're not purely that tropical system. The other big difference is in tropical storms, hurricanes, things you're familiar with, the strongest winds are near the center, and they get weaker as you get farther away. In subtropical storms, that's the opposite. The stronger winds are off away from the center. So, for instance, in what we're looking at here with currently Nicole, you could see that the wind field, and that's what that little blue line is displaced. The stronger winds are over here, not near the center. Now, if these start to tug towards the middle and more thunderstorms form near the middle, it becomes a tropical system. But without overly confusing you with all these kind of meteorological differences, the impacts are kind of the same. It just means it's kind of more of a hybrid. It's not a pure tropical system. It also means it spreads the impacts out over a much bigger area. That's probably the biggest thing that you notice with subtropical systems. They're kind of like what we see with nor'easters. Here's the future track. This is a 5-day cone, heads towards Florida, then kind of makes a recurvature, and then moves up the Carolina coast. And this would primarily happen later this week. I'm talking Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, into Saturday. Now, this storm is not expected to be a very strong storm, but it doesn't mean the impacts won't be widespread and maybe even significant along the coast, because what happens is this system approaches the coast, it's going to be spreading a big wind field and pushing a lot of water. And as you know, the shape of the southeast coast is like a funnel. Everything gets pushed towards the middle, so there could be significant surge here. Basically, what happens is every day the tide comes in and it doesn't go out. And the next day it gets a little bit higher and it doesn't really go out. And then the next high tide. So every high tide gets a little bit higher and every low tide doesn't go down as much. So over the next couple of days, the water will build and we will see probably some significant flooding along the coast. Not the widespread stuff you see with a giant hurricane, but probably more of a slow but steady increase in tides running every single day. So let's take a look at some of the forecast products. This is what we call the super ensemble to kind of give you an idea. They're very consistent considering the hurricane hunters haven't been out there, but this time of year, the fronts and the high pressure systems are pretty well established in November. So it's a little bit easier to kind of track these, but you can see there is a little bit of a spread here in the Carolinas. The overall forecast is pretty straightforward, but the intensity, this is the one thing that we aren't great at. We're better at track forecasting than intensity. But right now, all of the intensity forecasts bring it basically to a minimal hurricane or weak tropical or strong tropical storm. I wouldn't get too caught up in this because this could go up or down based on the center and what happens there. I think the bigger story is going to be the widespread impacts. And speaking of those, let's go back and look at the future track for this and kind of show you what this looks like going into the future. All right, real quick glance at the Hurricane Center forecast currently for Nicole. You can see this is the 11 a.m. advisory just came in. You can see it pushing off towards the northwest by Tuesday, should be heading towards the northern Bahamas by Wednesday morning, could become a minimal hurricane by Wednesday afternoon, and then moves over Florida, may even cross into the Gulf and then recurve up towards the South Carolina coast on Saturday. But these times are where the center is, remember, not where the impacts are. We will start feeling impacts way before the system gets where it's at on Saturday or even Friday. And that's real important with the setup. So let's go to the future cast here. And what I did here is I put the future radar and the wind field on here. So you can see this is today. The system, kind of a big comma shape, starts pushing off towards the west. Well, there's the wind data, but you can see how strong the winds are around this. High pressure over eastern Canada is going to help make the wind stronger. So what I mean by don't focus on where this is, there will be big gale force winds over a big section of the Atlantic. So if you're anywhere on the East Coast, that's some significant wind you're going to be feeling over the next couple of days, long before the system even gets close, because there's a squeeze play. This is a mountain of air of high pressure over eastern Canada. This is a valley of air, or a trough as we call it. So the air wants to flow and fill in that hole. So it's running downhill. We call that a pressure gradient. We show you maps in 2D, but in 3D, you got to remember the mountain of air is like this, and the trough, the low pressure is like that. That's why pressure is really, really important. When you hear about pressure getting lower, the storm's getting stronger because it's drawing more wind into its center. So there's, as we go into, this is Wednesday. You can see Wednesday evening, or Wednesday morning, excuse me. We'll go into Wednesday evening. You see it heading towards South Florida. But what I want you to notice in the Carolinas, and I know a lot of folks in Florida are looking, oh man, that looks pretty nasty. It probably will be down there, is all of this rain developing on the north side, because that squeeze play between the high pressure and the low pressure is likely going to expand some pretty heavy rain, or at least sheets of rain, way ahead of the system. So this will be moving into the Carolinas on Thursday. This is Thursday afternoon. We'll go into Thursday night. We'll get into early Friday morning. You know, it looks like it emerges in the Gulf briefly. I don't know if that'll have a huge impact, because what's happening when it's doing this, what's starting to steer it is a big trough. And this is this monster cold front coming down that's eventually going to cool us off here. It's going to pick it up. So wherever it is down here, it's going to get picked up and launched to the northeast fairly quickly. When that happens, it's going to pick up speed, but it's also going to pick up some wind energy. You could see the rain. This is on Friday, some widespread rain. For the Panthers game, let's go back to Thursday real quickly. Thursday night, we're likely going to have showers moving at some point during the game, and maybe early or late, depending on the timing of these bands, but it's definitely going to be windy. We'll go back to Friday. So Friday, the system starts to move up the coast, and you can see picking up some speed now. So this is Saturday morning, 7 a.m. near Jacksonville. By afternoon, it's already up near Wilmington. So you can see it's moving much quicker at this time. Notice on the backside, dry air is likely going to start getting pulled in on this, and that will start shutting off some of the rainfall. So the heaviest rain is going to happen way ahead of the system, but the strongest winds will likely happen at some point on Saturday. Then by Saturday night into Sunday, look at Sunday morning. It's off the East Coast, and it's way up in New England. So let's go back. This is going to be Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock. Look where it is, east of Boston. Let's go back to Friday night. It's down here over Florida. So you can see this thing is going to be hauling once it gets picked up by that trough, and it's going to be out of here. So let's go back to the forecast and show you some of the rainfall amounts that I'm expecting. If the track holds true, the heaviest rain will be along the coast. There'll be a pretty sharp cutoff here. So again, depending on the track, if it stays closer to the coast, remember the super ensemble, there's a lot of tracks near the coast. If it's here, less rain for the Western Carolinas, really heavy rain for the coast. If it's back in here, we're likely going to see heavier rain, but probably less for the coast. We'll go through time. I'll kind of show you this, how this unfolds. You see this heavy rain start to spread north. And again, a lot of this happens, it looks like to me, starting Friday early morning, maybe late Thursday at the earliest. Friday looks to be rough, and then going into Saturday morning, and then it's out of here. So that gives you a rough idea on just how much rain we could see across the eastern part of the Carolinas. So let's go back to the model map, and I'll loop this a couple times. This will be 180 hours worth of data. You could see it developing, Nicole going over Florida, taking that right turn, getting picked up by the trough and pushing off. What's interesting there, if you saw that, let me go back a couple frames. You can actually see the front and low pressure system over the Great Lakes. See it up here? This is the system that's going to pick it up. So this is why this time of year, sometimes it's easier to forecast, because these troughs and these fronts are much more frequent than in the summertime, when you have a lot more stagnant air mass. The jet streams way up to the north, the steering currents are much more subtle and weak. This time of year, you know, the fronts, the low pressure systems are much more robust. They're further south, so they pick these systems up quickly. But you also get a lot of hybrid systems. Think about Hurricane Sandy, the perfect storm, subtropical systems. You get kind of blended systems, kind of nor'easters. And that's kind of what I think Nicole's going to end up being as it moves to the northeast. Kind of more of a nor'easter subtropical system. But remember, don't get caught up in the labels. It's about the impacts. Pay attention to your local impacts. Heavy rain, storm surge, wind, flooding. Those are the things we're worried about, regardless of what the thing is called. Are those things happening to your property, your home? That's what you need to pay attention to over the next week or so as the system pushes out to the northeast. I will post updates throughout the week. This was a pretty long one, but we're kind of setting the table for what's going to happen with Subtropical Storm Nicole.